From sand and earth has emerged much of the hidden truth of man's development. Stories long thought to be legend have been proven through archaeological findings. Though there is an occasional misrepresentation, for the most part we don't doubt archaeologists. We would prefer to revel in the odyssey of our own beginnings. Ambition led Ron Wyatt to his personal crossroads with a biblical tale known to every school child. 22 years later, he still doesn't have all the proof that some would demand. But the mystery of the boat-like shape on the side of a mountain in Turkey has made Ron a celebrity. But in the field of archaeology, celebrity comes at a price.
There's a real soft place in the earth right under it.
On June 16, 1987, Ron Wyatt and a documentary film team from the United States traveled to eastern Turkey at the invitation of the governor of the Turkish province of Agri. There, they participate in a ceremony at the base of a site known locally as Doomsday Mountain. A ceremony of commemoration marking not only this now historic region, but the apex of 27 years of painstaking and sometimes life-threatening research. On June 20th, 1987, the governor of Agri proclaims to the world that the Turkish archaeological authorities confirmed the findings of the Ron Wyatt expedition and declare the area under investigation the landing site of the legendary Noahs Ark. Ron's contribution to this discovery earns him VIP status as he actively participates in the dedication of the site. The traditional sacrifice of a lamb sanctifies this holy place as the governor drops the first shovel of concrete into the inaugural footing of what will become a multicultural, interfaith visitors center and park. Here, all may gaze upon what experts believe to be the final resting place of Noah's Ark.
Not everyone addresses Wyatt's work with enthusiasm. Biblical Archaeological Digest seems to consider him either a fraud or a con man. Many over the years have attempted to detract from his findings, but the real mystery in Wyatt's story is what inspires a family man with a perfectly normal life to travel halfway around the world in search of something that's been missing and presumed lost for thousands of years.
Although precise dating of military intelligence photographs is top secret information, researchers have learned that prior to 1960, in the heart of the mountains of Ararat, while on a routine military reconnaissance survey, Turkish Air Force Lieutenant A. Kurtz took an aerial photograph of a curious boat-shaped object. Subsequent review by Turkish photographic specialists confirmed the dimensions of this object to be virtually identical to those stated in the Old Testament as the length and roughly the width of the famous Diluvian vessel. In 1960, news of these photos reaches the United States. They are brought before the Archaeological Research Foundation, an advanced group of scientists and explorers. Under the aegis of the Turkish military, a joint Turkish-American expedition is assembled. Wilbur Bishop, a member of the 1960 expedition.
The trip to Dogabazit started, of course, in Ankara. We flew with the Turkish airline to Erzurum. We went from there to Dogabazit. The Turkish people knew what we were talking about, of course, and we went by the van over to this camp, which is right near the entrance to Persia. And there we rode horseback over to the site.
The area is a hotbed of terrorism and conflict, with neighbors like Iraq, Iran, and Soviet Georgia. Turkish soldiers accompanied the expedition to assure their safe passage to and from the region.
Well, we got off of the horses and we looked down and see it right from there. We was about, I guess, 500 feet from the site, on the side of the hill. We walked down from there. We had to And it jumped several crevices in the earth from the earthquakes that had happened. All of us thought it was a boat.
Dr. Arthur Brandenberger, a stereophotogrammetry expert, accompanies the group to the region. After studying the object and comparing the measurements to those in the aerial photos, he states, "I have no doubt at all that the object is a ship. In my entire career, I have never seen an object like this on a stereo photo." The rest of the team remain unconvinced. Their disappointment over a lack of substantiating evidence impels them toward extreme measures. Wilbur Bishop.
I asked the Colonel Bockel if he had some dynamite. He says, "No, but we got plenty of black powder." And so I told him, "Go get it."
Following the blast, the team finds nothing with which to convince the rest of the world that the boat-shaped object is the fabled Ark.
So we left, when we didn't find any timber or anything, well, we figured it wasn't there.
Looking to capitalize on what could be one of the greatest archaeological finds since the pyramids, the U.S.-Turkish team, made up of private treasure seekers as well as government personnel, lose heart when their hard work doesn't produce immediate, tangible results. Though their lack of scientific proof doesn't reflect well on this first expedition, other Ark hunters will eventually capitalize on their mistakes. This is especially true of Ron Wyatt, who begins his search by investigating confidential military reports and arcane text, seeking any relevant account of the Ark. What he finds is astonishing.
On September 5, 1960, Life magazine reports the results of the expedition, after which public interest in the object wanes for everyone except Ron Wyatt. Ron Wyatt is a nurse anesthetist practicing at Memorial Hospital of Nashville, Tennessee. He is inspired by the mystery of the object and the Life magazine article. Though he cannot take time away from his family and career obligations to set out on an expedition of his own, he immerses himself in the study of the Ark and its place in history. He pursues the related sciences, geology, archaeology, chemistry, preparing himself for his ultimate goal, the field exploration of the boat-shaped object.
We, at that point in time, began to do a lot of research, background research on the probable landing site of Noahs Ark, and review the existing stories about people that claim to have seen the Ark on the mountain and nearby areas.
Over 200 versions of a global deluge, a flood of planetary proportions, exist in the folklore and historical references of various cultures. Written individual accounts provide abundant evidence for a universal flood theory. Ron Wyatt's independent studies reveal approximately 30 different sightings of the Ark's purported resting place on or near Mount Ararat. None of these sightings, however, are factually based, and many are contradictory.
The 30 so-called eyewitnesses, and I don't doubt the integrity of these people, there are several stone formations on that mountain that resemble a boat, but no one was ever able to get photographic proof. Also, I found that, say for example, in World War II, the pilots that flew by the mountain and made entries in their flight log that they had seen a boat-shaped formation on the mountain. They said that the boat-shaped formation was on the southeast face of the mountain. The person that wrote this, or quoted this in his book, said that the log stated it was on the northwest face of the mountain. And so I found that some of the reliable data had been misquoted in some of the books in an attempt to convince people that the boat perhaps was in a different site than it really was.
Mount Ararat, a peak capped by glaciers, has been an active volcano on and off for thousands of years. No wood structure could possibly have survived on this mountain scoured by lava and ice. However, of the 30 well-documented sightings, not one places the Ark precisely on Mount Ararat. In the biblical text itself, Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, it states the Ark came to rest in the mountains. That's plural, mountains of Ararat. His conclusion inspires Ron Wyatt to visit once again the findings of Wilbur Bishop's team, and the site explored by the 1960 U.S.-Turkish expedition. In 1977, after 17 years of research, Ron is at last able to begin fieldwork in eastern Turkey. He hires D. Lavar, a local guide who over time proves an indispensable aid to the research. Their first foray into this intimidating land reveals a defiant vastness, making their search seem endless. The region, burdened by ages of warfare and laden with antiquity, is a place almost lost in time.
Wyatt's path is pitted with problems. One man, a confidant and chief physicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, actually tries to steal Ron's discovery, breaking into his study and rifling through his files in a botched attempt to abscond with the precious record of his find. Vicious competitors scramble to locate the Ark in a different geographical region simply to forestall the Wyatt expedition and keep them from staking their claim. When fame and fortune are at stake, anything is fair game.
To pierce the imposing veil of time, Ron takes his investigation to the villages surrounding Ararat. Here in the spoken chronicles of the local inhabitants, he hopes to turn fable into fact and legend into history. His intuition pays off. By visiting with villagers in the proximity of the 1960 expedition and earning their trust, Ron Wyatt is at last directed to the exact location of the object which has held his fascination for so many years.
And here we are at last, gazing upon the mortal remains of the great boat that Noah and his family rode to safety.
When I arrived at the boat-shaped object, I was amazed at how much it looked like a boat. If you've ever seen a boat that had a hole in it and had partially sunk down to where just the railings of the boat were above the water, this is exactly what I saw sitting out there on that mountainside.
Located approximately 15 miles south of Mount Ararat, the site is located atop Doomsday Mountain. Its elevation? 6,375 feet above sea level. The dimensions are confirmed as approximately 515 feet in length, corresponding with the aerial photo survey and ground measurements made by the Turkish U.S. expedition. It appears a long boat-shaped semi-oval with a mound in the center. 20-foot earth-packed rims outline the immensity of the structure. It rests on sedimentary Cretaceous water-laid rock. This suggests that the entire valley was once immersed in water, an important criteria for establishing this area as the possible landing site of the Ark. Although soil samples for chemical analysis are in order, Ron Wyatt lacks the appropriate permits, and so must satisfy himself with his only substantial evidence: the established dimensions and obvious boat shape of the half-buried relic. Before returning home, Ron continues his search for fragments of information about the legendary ship, conferring with and befriending the villagers of the area. Other mysteries unfold. The Turkish word for Ararat is Agradag, or Mountain of Pain. In ancient times, the area acts as a buffer kingdom between rival empires, with the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel from fierce warring nations an almost regular occurrence. The local villagers, coming to trust Ron, are familiar with every boulder of their land. Their unselfish assistance leads him to a series of remarkable discoveries. He is directed to 4 massive anchor stones, each approximately 8 feet high and weighing several tons. Similar in proportion and design, the stones have 8 distinct crosses which experts believe represent the 8 survivors of the Great Flood. Each cross engraving seems to represent an individual survivor. The alignment and placement of each cross is characteristic of that individual's relationship with Noah and, respectively, to the others in the group. Ron Wyatt.
Like all the other grave markers in this area, the Valley of the Eight, this marker once had 8 crosses. Now these are a beautiful representation of the ornate Byzantine cross dating back to approximately the 3rd century A.D. The large cross representing Noah is especially ornate. The one representing his wife is quite a beautiful design. Now we have the matched pairing here, the eldest son and his wife. These crosses are of the ornate style. We have this cross here that represents one of the sons beyond the first son, and it matches with this one. Up here we have the representation of the other son, but the representation, or the cross representing his wife, is missing and apparently got broken away over the years. The alignment of these stones tell us the direction from which the boat came as it approached and the mountain that it landed on. One of these stones is approximately a quarter of a mile from the boat itself. Now, these stones, or this type anchor stone, is a very familiar object to the students of early navigation. They were used by many of the early civilizations, the Phoenicians in particular, and the shores of the Mediterranean and the floor of the Mediterranean is strewn with these stones. The difference that becomes obvious immediately is the difference in size.
Dragged as ballast behind the ships to which they were tethered, these anchor stones were commonplace on ships sailing the Mediterranean for millennia. Only in size do these stones differ from their Mediterranean counterparts. It is hypothesized that the colossal size of these stones indicates their use as an anchor on a ship of extreme proportions, perhaps even ark-size proportions. The villagers support this physical evidence with their fabulous tales brought down through the years from father to son. The village in which the standing anchor stone rests is known as the Village of Eight. Located a few miles from the village, this majestic valley is known as the Valley or Region of the Eight. None of the villagers can identify how these places were named, but many think them a message handed down from antiquity, a tribute to Noah and his family, the 8 survivors of the Great Deluge. With a PhD in archaeology, Dr. William Shea of the Biblical Research Institute of Washington, D.C., assists in analyzing the data from the Wyatt expedition. His own interest in the boat-shaped object dates back to the original 1960 research junket. As a teacher of Old Testament studies, Dr. Shea brings a revered and varied perspective to his review of the facts surrounding the ark-like phenomenon. Dr. Shea.
I've never measured the exact distance, but if you stand on the object, you can see Mount Ararat in the near foreground. Well, Mount Ararat is a very beautiful and very interesting mountain, but it has certain drawbacks when you think of the flood story in the Bible. Mount Ararat is a volcanic peak over 16,000 feet high. If you think about the ark coming to land on a volcanic mountain, that's not a very propitious spot for it to be salvaged if you're going to find any remains. In fact, some of my friends who have been working on that particular mountain have been working on the northwest face where there's the Great Ahura Gorge. Now that blew out in historical times, and it seems like to me that would be the very worst place to have a preserved remnants of the ark. So, on the other hand, the site that we've been talking about in the mountains across the valley, those are sedimentary rocks. They're not volcanic rocks. Sedimentary rocks, water-laid rocks, the type of rocks that one would expect from flood activity. Another thing about Mount Ararat is that it's a glacial-covered mountain peak. I don't know the exact dimensions, and it varies according to the weather, of course. The glaciers shrink back in the summertime, and they extend in the wintertime. But several thousand feet of the mountain's top are covered with glaciers, and these glaciers, of course, scour the rock of the mountainside. So if you had an ark-shaped object up there, it would suffer from the same damage that the scouring of the rock would suffer from. Now, the formation that we have, as it's been surveyed both from aerial photographs and on the ground, it's been measured both ways, is 150 meters long, or almost 500 feet. If you take that long Egyptian cubit, assuming Moses is the author of the account, or the transmitter of the account, and apply that standard of measurement, It is interesting that this formation, either in the photographs or on the ground, has measured to essentially what would be 300 cubits long. Now, that's a remarkable correspondence. It's not 500 cubits, it's not 150 cubits, it just happens to be 300 cubits long. And the biblical story just happens to record the length of the ark as 300 cubits long. One further suggestion about the width of the formation. If you take the biblical measurements and add them up, you come out to a figure relatively close to the width of the formation in this way. The height of the ark was 30 cubits, the width of the ark was 50 cubits, and the height of the ark was another 30 cubits. Now, if you add that up as the distance around the hull of the ark, you get 110 cubits. The width of the formation, as measured on the ground, is 150 feet. Just as a rough figure, 100 cubits would be 150 feet, so it's relatively close. It's not precise and not exact, but it's relatively close, even figuring it that way. I've seen 3 of those stones in the field. One is in a village and 2 are out in the fields by the village. The first point that one can make in comparing with anchor stones, and we have many, many anchor stones to compare with. Anchor stones were the common way to anchor ships until iron came in about 1200 BC. Anchor stones are tall in one dimension. They are thin in another direction, and they have a hole at the top. Now, the major difference between this type of stone that we find here in Turkey and the stones that we find in the Mediterranean are that this is larger. This is taller than a man by a foot or so. You could project that and say maybe it goes along with a larger ship. Now, the other aspect of these stones is their iconography. Somebody has carved some signs into them, as you can see from this one right here. The large cross in the center would be Noah. The medium-sized cross to the right and below would represent Noah's wife. 3 of the crosses up one side, above the arm of the cross, the major cross, would represent Noah's sons. The other 3 crosses up the other side would represent the wives of Noah's sons. There's exactly 8 crosses. There are 8 people in the flood story, and these are engraved upon stones that look very much like anchor type of stones. The people who put those crosses on these stones saw some type of connection between these particular stones and the idea of Noah and the ark and the 8 people that were in the ark, according to the biblical record. Now, these stones are very unusual and irregular in that they are not near any normal natural body of water. It seems evident to me that somebody either wanted to depict something like an anchor stone or actually used an anchor stone in this area. And yet the nearest bodies of water are 75 miles to the southwest and 100 miles to the north. No normal, natural, reasonable explanation for why anchor stones would be used in this particular area.
Many qualified scientists and archaeologists contend that Ron Wyatt's methods are absurd. They say that Ron is a victim of his own rhetoric and that his facts, while partially true, are equally suspect. He's been accused of placing relics at the site and then falsely claiming that they're authentic. The scientific facts will ultimately determine the legitimacy of the find.
Working as a team, their research is both satisfying and productive. Both men are convinced that with the proper permits, enabling detailed geological analysis and subsurface study, if not excavation, that a breakthrough of major historical significance is in the making. Then, as though Wyatt's field successes were not enough to catapult the research into a whole new strata of discovery, a literally earth-shattering breakthrough takes place.
My disappointment at having to wait on a permit for a later date was offset by an earthquake that happened in 1978 that did a much better job of excavating the boat than I could have done in maybe a year or 2 years hard work.
The earthquake drops the veil of soil from along one side of the boat's remains, leaving exposed the timber-shaped ribs of the ancient vessel. Here, at 6,300 feet above sea level, in the mountains of Ararat, lies what appears to be the hull of a massive, ancient, man-made ship. The sides of the object clearly exposed, the outline of the hull as evident now as the object's incredible mass.
It simply dropped the earth away from the outside of the boat and left the rib timbers and other structures of the boat out there where you could see them. Also, there was a vertical split right down the center of the boat, which enabled me to measure the depth of the boat, plus get good, clean, fresh sample material out of there to have analyzed to tell us more about the chemical composition of the boat.
These two photos, post and pre-quake, establish the extent of nature's timely excavation. On the left, a photo taken in 1960 by the Turkish-U.S. team. At right, a photo taken by the Wyatt expedition in 1979, shortly after the earthquake. These photos clearly illustrate the large quantities of earth displaced from the sides of the object, before the quake and after. The quake has cracked the object down the center, allowing fresh soil samples to be taken for analysis. Samples are taken from the near vicinity as well to identify any significant differences in quantities of trace chemicals. The samples are rushed back to the United States, where they are immediately analyzed. The results are electrifying. A high carbon content in the soil taken from where the boat's timbers are exposed provides evidence of long decayed wood. Traces of metal are detected, revealing the possibility of objects such as metal supports. These are the first factual signs that the object is not simply a natural phenomenon, but may prove to be man-made.
Soil samples have been taken from the formation on two different occasions, in 1979 and again in 1984. It's the 1979 samples that first gave the clue that there is a distinct difference in the amount of carbon in the formation as opposed to the field outside of the formation. I have the reports here. If there was wood in this formation, that kind of a reading with 5% of carbon content would point to it. That's the kind of reading you would expect to get from the decayed wood.
Once we became aware that there were concentrations of metal in this boat formation that were associated with what appeared to be structural remains, the next obvious step was to investigate the site with the use of metal detectors. We set up a expedition with permit to go out with 4 types of metal detection equipment, and with this we carefully surveyed the boat, and we laid out survey tape on top of the ground or on top of the formation to indicate the position of the metal patterns in the boat.
5 field research specialists, including Dr. John Baumgartner, a physicist from Los Alamos National Laboratories, accompany Ron on his next expedition. Using metal detection devices, they construct from the evidence gathered the unmistakable pattern, the regular features delineating a symmetrical, internal, subsurface structure of massive proportions. Dr. Shea.
You could call the year from August of '84 to August of '85 the year of the metal detector, because he took a metal detector went over the formation, and first of all, he got positive readings on his metal detector, but it showed readings in patterns. And the results with all 3 different types of metal detectors were consistent, and they did indeed give a pattern as they laid out strips. Now, they also got crosswise patterns, and this was first discovered with the metal detectors.
4 different types of metal detectors are used. All produce positive readings, translated here into visually observable features. No positive results occur in the readings taken outside the boat-shaped area. Dr. Shea.
If you had petrified wood in this formation, And the petrification takes place by a process of mineral elements flowing through the wood and depositing in them. Then you would expect the trace readings that those minerals would give to follow the pattern of the decayed timbers and the petrified wood, petrification process. And so one possibility would be that this is a reflection of the petrification process of an original form, which would underlay this formation as it now stands.
When we did this metal detector evaluation of the boat formation, we covered the sides of the boat also, the area that had been left bare when the earth fell away during the earthquake, and the rib timber patterns and the keel or keelson patterns were very obvious there along the sides also. Now, another thing we did with these metal detectors, where we spotted high concentrations, say of iron, for example, we were able to collect a sample of 91% pure iron that showed preferential gradients under microscopic examination. And in our language, that meant that this had been hand-worked.
Their evidence is strong, but without excavating the site, a costly and time-consuming process, the group is concerned that they may not realistically be able to confirm their findings and prove to all the world the existence of a subterranean vessel.
Scientific testing is the key to dating. It's also essential to establishing the facts that will define the structure as a boat. Bringing experts to this location in eastern Turkey, however, is another matter. It's brimming with ethnic and national conflicts. Though they can't be certain of the motives, Ron and his party have been targeted for kidnapping and possible extermination by a group of terrorists notorious in the area. Despite this threat, the scientists and researchers invited on the expedition choose to continue on their mission, and the team is dispatched to the site.
Subsurface interface radar transmits electromagnetic pulses, or short-wavelength electric energy bursts, into the ground. Echoes from these pulses bounce back and are measured by a receiver. The echo time can be translated into readings. These are graphically recorded on a continuous roll of paper, like you might see in the printout of an electrocardiogram. By this process, objects beneath the ground may be located and, to some degree, measured.
We got back to America, raised the money, and made the arrangements to get a subsurface interface radar system out to eastern Turkey. So in getting permits to investigate this area, or to excavate the area, the Turkish government have to consider what their neighbors will perceive this to be in, matters of the security of their borders.
In the summer of 1986, the Wyatt expedition assembles once again. They receive the necessary permits from the Turkish government and prepare to perform the radar scan. Everything is set up for this most critical scientific confirmation. Then, what could never have been predicted comes to pass, and they are stopped dead in their tracks.
Now, we had been informed that we were in some danger of terrorists attacking us or taking us hostage. And in the light of this, the Turkish government provided a group of 30 commandos that accompanied us out to the boat formation each day. And they would go out and hide themselves in the crevices, canyons and whatnot around the boat site. Now, what happened just took a matter of seconds, but to me it seemed like several minutes. Our Turkish commandos just rose up literally from the earth where they had been hiding and decimated these terrorists with automatic gunfire.
The thunder of gunfire rocks the walls of Doomsday Mountain, a seat of regional conflict for centuries. The Turkish commandos make short work of this violent challenge, leaving their adversaries silenced forever. The Wyatt expedition makes the Turkish headlines, but not in the way that they had sought.
This effectively stalled our attempts to do a radar scan on the boat, and of course it was some time.
The radar technicians, special equipment, and support personnel included in this unsuccessful expedition make this setback not only frustrating, but costly. Not knowing whether his way is obstructed by fate or some other less obvious interference, Ron Wyatt must patiently endure. He realizes that there are competitors who would attempt to preempt his effort, and others with political and even religious reasons for trying to dissuade him from his quest. Nevertheless, in August of 1985, the Wyatt expedition receives the necessary government permits to perform the radar examinations. The results are staggering. Massive keelsons, deck timbers, open chambers, and other nautical configurations appear before their eyes, telling the story of what specialists believe to be the remains of an enormous, ancient, man-made ship.
Basically, the radar scans show the same thing that the metal detector scans did, only with more detail. They show there is a pattern. They show there's a pattern of linear lines, there's a pattern of cross lines, and there's a pattern of even distribution to these lines in both directions. Now, that's precisely what you would expect out of the remains of a ship-type object, because you would have a keel, you would have parallel lines, which would be keelsons, and you would have the transverse lines, which would be bulkheads and other reinforcing of the ship.
Immediately after the earthquake, it was to measure the depth of the deposit or the remains of the boat along the length of the boat. At the point where the deposit thickened, it was at that point that the upper decks began, and we found that this was a three-tiered or three-decked boat. Now, in 1985, 1986, and 87, we were able to measure this laterally also. This data, with the data that we got from the radar scan, allows us to know what the boat looked like and to be able to reproduce a model, scale model of that boat within very close tolerances of what it actually looked like. This is the best estimate of what Noah's Ark looked like. Now, the deck portion of the boat shows up very clearly on the radar scans, and we have reproduced that here in the deck portion of the model. Now, the boat itself is very unique internally as well as externally, and in this end we find the bracing to hold the hull out and to maintain its strength in a stormy sea. As you look up the boat here, you find that there's many chambers in here, which no doubt were the areas that the animals were kept in. Up near the front, we have a ramp system which allowed the animals and the people that occupied the boat to move from one level of the boat to the other, and this, of course, begins at the door.
We've gone about as far as we can go in surface survey work and even scanning work. There are other types of scans that could be done. I don't know that it would be that helpful, really, to get more scans. What we really need now is excavation. But I would say that each one of these positive steps does point directly identifying this formation as containing remains of Noah's Ark. But the final proof of the pudding ultimately must come from excavation.
We're delighted with the results, and at this point in time, personally, I can look anybody in the eye and say that this boat-shaped formation in eastern Turkey is actually the remains of Noah's Ark.
It is human nature to want to know our origins and to fill in the blanks of unwritten history. To justify spiritual beliefs, many have tried to confirm the existence of God with black and white facts. While there is factual evidence that the remains of a boat are buried on Ron's Mountain, there's nothing conclusive to prove that it's the fabled Ark. Then again, there's nothing conclusive to prove that it isn't.
In terms of the importance of the location of Noah's Ark and the identification of it, I would say make three main points. First of all, as one goes through the history of the human race in the Bible, this stands as an important historical event, a very transitional event. It's an event that divides two eras in biblical history. So just in terms of history of the race, it's an important event. Second, I would say that it will have far-reaching implications in the realms of both science and history. Obviously, some scientific theories are going to have to be revised if we really have found a boat-shaped formation from Diluvian times at the 6,300-foot level in these mountains in eastern Turkey. Third, I would say that there is a religious teaching out of it. There's a theology in Genesis 6 to 9, the three chapters that cover the flood story, and I would say it reveals two sides of the character of God. Reveals his character as judge of the antediluvians for the nature of their civilization, yet his redemptive activity is shown in his graciousness and mercy extended to Noah and his family.
In every generation, there are those who dedicate their lives against all odds to the greater search for knowledge and truth. Before them lay not only the impediments of nature, but the obstructions placed by men unfriendly to their quest. These obstructions are made manifest through deception, misleading information, and political trickery perpetrated often by governments and powerful religious leaders. Overcoming each challenge and facing down every obstacle along the way, the Ron Wyatt expedition has contributed to the world what was formerly considered lost to time and the elements. It is now proclaimed by many to be the final resting place of that legendary diluvian vessel, the salvation of all life on our small planet, none other than Noah's Ark.
In his quest for Noah's Ark, Ron Wyatt discovered an enormous, ancient, boat-shaped object partially buried on a mountainside, 6,300 feet above sea level. Why is it there is a question for civilization to puzzle over for centuries to come. Why it has taken this long for you and I to learn of the Ark is perhaps a man-made mystery of more pressing significance. Lost no more are the phenomenon archives.
The traditional sacrifice of a lamb sanctifies this holy place as the governor drops the first shovel of concrete into the inaugural footing of what will become a multicultural, interfaith visitor center and park. Here, all may gaze upon what experts believe to be the final resting place of Noah's Ark.
Not everyone addresses Wyatt's work with enthusiasm. Biblical Archaeological Digest seems to consider him either a fraud or a con man. Many over the years have attempted to detract from his findings, but the real mystery in Wyatt's story is what inspires a family man with a perfectly normal life to travel halfway around the world in search of something
Roughly the width of the famous Diluvian vessel. In 1960, news of these photos reaches the United States. They are brought before the Archaeological Research Foundation, an advanced group of scientists and explorers. Under the aegis of the Turkish military, a joint Turkish-American expedition is assembled. Wilbur Bishop, a member of the 1960 expedition.
The trip to Dogabazit started, of course, in Ankara. We flew with the Turkish airline to Erzurum. We went from there to Dogabazit. The Turkish people knew what we wanted, what we were talking about, of course, and we went by the van over to this.
From sand and earth has emerged much of the hidden truth of man's development. Stories long thought to be legend have been proven through archaeological findings. Though there is an occasional misrepresentation, for the most part we don't doubt archaeologists. We would prefer to revel in the odyssey of our own beginnings. Ambition led Ron Wyatt to his personal crossroads with a biblical tale known to every school child. 22 years later, he still doesn't have all the proof that some would demand. But the mystery of the boat-like shape on the side of a mountain in Turkey has made Ron a celebrity. But in the field of archaeology, celebrity comes at a price.
There's a real soft place in the earth right under it.
On June 16, 1987, Ron Wyatt and a documentary film team from the United States traveled to eastern Turkey at the invitation of the governor of the Turkish province of Agri. There, they participate in a ceremony at the base of a site known locally as Doomsday Mountain. A ceremony of commemoration marking not only this now historic region, but the apex of 27 years of painstaking and sometimes life-threatening research. On June 20th, 1987, the governor of Agri proclaims to the world that the Turkish archaeological authorities confirmed the findings of the Ron Wyatt expedition and declare the area under investigation the landing site of the legendary Noahs Ark. Ron's contribution to this discovery earns him VIP status as he actively participates in the dedication of the site.
That's been missing and presumed lost for thousands of years.
Although precise dating of military intelligence photographs is top secret information, researchers have learned that prior to 1960, in the heart of the mountains of Ararat, while on a routine military reconnaissance survey, Turkish Air Force Lieutenant A. Kurtz took an aerial photograph of a curious boat-shaped object. Subsequent review by Turkish photographic specialists confirmed the dimensions of this object to be virtually identical to those stated in the Old Testament as the length